You're listening to The Blunt Truth. Unscripted, uncensored, unwoke. Get ready to challenge everything.
All right, welcome to episode 14 of The Blunt Truth. Here with a good buddy of mine, Nicholas George. Hey, Nick.
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you, Stephen.
Likewise, it's going very well. Thank you for asking. We are very excited to learn more about the biblical character Jesus. Now, we had a whole episode recording that got glitched out, didn't save, which is all good for the listeners because this one should be even better. So, just to kind of dive into the topic, basically, the character in the King James Bible, is that the version we're talking about?
Sure, we can use that. It's a good standard. It's the one the Masons use.
Sure. So we are basically saying that is not like a real historical, year by year life account of a real person, but rather it's part of a propagandized, sensationalized amalgamation of fact and fiction that really includes a lot of the same deceptive tricks and nets, as you'll dive into, that we see around us in society today.
Yes.
So it's a really interesting, yeah. So without further ado, dive right in and talk to us a little bit about, open the floor. What is the truth behind the Jesus character?
Okay. I'm going to start with what I think is a short summarization and then let you tell me where you'd like me to expand. There was originally a teaching of righteousness movement that was started after the first Jewish temple was leveled in 587 BC. And that group of people that were exiled to the desert weren't just hardcore Jews. They were also people that had been following Pythagoras. And the conglomeration of the coordination of those groups, they came together and became a hybrid organization that was known as the Sons of Light. And they were the dawn of the Dead Sea Scrolls community. And so the reason they put those time capsules in the ground is so that we would know what the original righteous teaching was. And they were afraid to put the identity of the righteous teacher in the scrolls because they knew that if they didn't talk in something called pesher, which is code, double code, then their intentions might be discovered and destroyed by the largest terrorist or enterprise empire that had ever accumulated itself. And so they had to put these things kind of in code and in caves. And they started popping up about the time that the church decided it wanted to invent Israel in the late 1800s. And they could not stop those things from popping out of the ground. And so they needed to put crime scene tape around. And so they started making plans for a Jewish state so that they could contain the discovery. And because it was literally their lifeblood was on the line. Because what's in the scrolls is that the original movement by Pythagoras 600 years before the crucified person was the same. And it was anti-money, it was anti-meat eating, and it was anti-government. They didn't call it government back then, but it meant the same thing, mind control. So I refer to them as the three M's, or the three nets of deception, are spoken of throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls as the nets cast by the greatest demon prince of this world, Belial. And Belial takes on all of the characteristics that Rome end up ascribing to Christ. And then they mixed the good components of Apollonius of Tyana, Judas the Galilean, the components that they wanted us to know about him, and the brother of Judas, the crucified person, which is James, the just, which they never properly identify in the Bible for a reason. They call him James the Less because they're trying to diminish his character. But he was the actual leader of the movement immediately after the crucifixion of his brother. And they were both Pythagoreans. And that's why their diet was different than Jewish. And that's why they were exiled to the desert. They were operating outside of the Sadducees and Pharisees. They were hybridizing in the teachings of righteousness of Pythagoras, who was the righteous teacher in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So their movement was stifled and rebranded as Jewish, which leaves a lot of questions about why the teaching wasn't. And then Paul comes in and takes the mess and then creates an amalgamation of all these characters. James, Judas, himself, Paul, of course, was part of the character of building of Christ, and then Apollonius of Tyana. And there may be more characters that they used, that they pulled from to make this Frankenstein. But when they did, they created a huge deviation in hygienic and dietary wisdom that could only be described as demonic in my estimation. And that's the whole story. They're hiding a Pythagorean movement that's anti-government, anti-money, and anti-meat eating. Apparently, they all go together. And if you cut the leg of any one of the legs of that three-legged stool, the whole damn thing falls apart. So you grab the part in your life that you can control the controllables, and you start there, and then the revolution starts in the gut bacteria, first brain consciousness, and your decisions change, and you become unmanageable.
Very interesting, and I'll say I don't necessarily agree completely with not eating meat, but I can definitely agree that actually it's the factory farms and the gross overconsumption of meat are both definitely working in conjunction to infuse demonic energy because when I eat, especially dairy, when you have a mother torn from the baby, and I mean, it literally hurts my cells as that energy like goes out of me after I eat it. It like feels like caustic,
It's not just,
gross.
it's a hormonal thing.
Yeah, yeah. But, definitely am anti-government, and this is really interesting. Yeah, okay, so this demon, let's talk a little bit about demonology because that was a really incredible conception of the biblical account of Jesus. I do want to ask a little bit after we talk about demonology. I want to ask about, it's 2:22, that's tripping me out. I want to ask about the different versions of the Bible, maybe the Greek version, the Hebrew version, the Aramaic version, as well as maybe some of the lost scrolls or the lost scriptures, the book of Enoch, maybe some of the Ethiopian scriptures that are not in. I'm really not educated, but I understand there's a lot there. So, demonology, you spelled it out, Belial, Bilial. That's the demon's name, Bilial.
Belial.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha, Belial. And I had asked you if this was like a monster on the other side of the veil, and you explained it's an energetic frequency on this side, almost like it's a thought form. So talk to me about who he is, maybe why that's the name that's been ascribed, and maybe why demonology is the best lens or a really good lens for understanding how it manifests.
Okay. Well, first you have to believe there is a creator that not only created your soul, but you have to understand that when I say you, I mean everybody. You understand that there's a difference between the one that created our soul on the other side of the veil, as you said. And then on this side, there's a different creator. And he likes to engender himself, which is a tell, like in poker. He's the creator of souls, which has no gender or name. It's unknowable in those ways. And to try to ascribe those things to it would be showing your, profane, and that you're not adept. In Hermeticism, the best way to describe this creator of souls is love and free will, combined, united. Impossible for it to be jealous about the free will decisions. But that's not the creator of the Bible. That's not the creator of this world at all. Everybody knows that much, at least. But even in Corinthians, it says love is not jealous. And so there's a clear separation there between the core essence of the entity that created love and the one that we find as the creator in the Bible. And we also know that the creator in the Bible never claims to be the creator of souls. He likes to use the word spirits a lot because back then they knew the difference between the astral spirit and the immortal soul. And so they're telling the truth there. And I guess where I was going with this is once you understand that there is the difference between those two types of creators, and then you understand that you're a creator, but you're just at a different level in the game, right? And that this being that has been doing this a lot longer than us, and that has taken a path that provides a lot of resistance to the whole love and free will of the soul. He ends up the greatest resistance game board for the soul to come learn in, to educate itself. And basically, I guess you could say that the creator of love and the free will in the soul took the lemons, the bastardized demiurge, who thinks he's the most high, and turned them into lemonade by allowing us to come here and put our toes in the water of his creation and then leave again as many times as we want. And we're not subject to him. And this explains a little bit more about why he gets jealous when we don't bend a knee or pray to him over a dead carcass before we pollute ourselves with it. Excuse my French. That's from the scrolls. And they called it carrion.
Sure. And yeah, no, I mean, just to interject my own challenge, I would say praying with anything that was murdered, praying over anything that was murdered for reasons of gluttony and to eat and hunger to, material reasons, and I would say if you kill a tree to eat the fruit on it, you shouldn't pray over that either.
Right.
But
It doesn't, the creator
certainly,
of love doesn't need that. He's not needing or wanting any of that. But go ahead. Or excuse me, I just gave it a gender. Didn't mean it around.
well, I think that I have a very unique perception, my friend. I never shared this with you. I think that creator is a masculine force, and it is the architect of the sky clock,
Yes.
astronumerology, and like
Agreed.
the omnipresent information energetic. But I think that creation is goddess, is the feminine counterpart. And I think that just like a healthy family has a father, a mother, and children, we are the divine children of creator and creation, which all matter is his wife. And a good father would ask his children to exalt the mother as well. And so I'm kind of a dual god person, maybe. And there's also primal source behind both of them that's like a void of potential energy or something that I don't even really
You're
understand. But
describing Demiurge
perhaps it
and
doesn't. Yeah,
Sophia, the Holy, but what the Christians call
interesting.
it the Holy Spirit, and most of them don't know that's a feminine spirit. It even says in the Bible. But she is Sophia, so she's the mother of the God of the Bible, who you're referring to, that larger feminine presence on this side of the veil. But she's still on this. And if you've ever heard of the Veil of Isis, or Unveiling Isis, that's exactly what that book is about, is being able to tear through the veil that she is on this side of.
Yeah, well, I see creation as matter, and it's going underground to be more magnetic, and its darkness, its stillness, its emotions, it's all matter. And people are like, look, I'm a big believer in detox and cleaning the temple and purifying the temple. And there's a sense of like everything is still creation and everything is still infused with God consciousness. But what's interesting is that you mentioned God of the Bible. You said is not creator of free will and love. So you're saying that what I'm describing is that like electrical, energetic, astrological component is not the one that created love and free
You
will.
believe in the immortal soul?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and you know that it has nothing to do with the material world. In fact, it does everything it can to clean itself of it after each time rents a car.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say nothing to do with. I would say it has something to do with it. Like you rent a car because you're on vacation to a new place to learn and grow and have experiences and make connections and maybe do some ripples that are cool.
Mhm.
And yeah, you drop the car off. It's not a big deal. The car isn't a big deal.
Right. You don't die. You just, the vacation's over, you get out of the car and you go back to your
Yeah.
life. And we have that on the other side of the Veil of Isis, or so
Yeah.
in what's called our soul group. And I know a little bit about this for reasons I told you earlier, but it's scientific method to do this research. And what you find from people that report from the theta state of consciousness on the other side of this is all evil and entities that practice maliciousness and things like that only exist in the material world. And souls come from somewhere that has no material. We're light. And that, I'm just making sure that you understand that separation when I'm talking about the God who created not the light of this world that's talked about in the Bible, but our soul, which is invisible to us here, but it's all we see on the other side is that light. All of the things, the walls and the artwork and everything that's around us on the other side is basically light that we're manifesting into a perception on the other side, but there's no material. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense, and I guess I could conceive of source creator is kind of the word that I use for the soul god, and then heavenly father is kind of the word that I use for the light god.
You mean the God of
If that
the
makes
Heavenly
any
Father?
sense.
You mean the God of this world, the creator of this?
Well, I also understand there's a materialistic satanic element that's like the white pope, the black pope, the gray pope, and a lot of people that use the word God are just talking about these mortal people that rule the world, and that there's maybe, you know, demonic energies ruling the material world, because if there's a dualistic yin yang principle where if the other side is inherently egoless and not constrained by time or space or illusions, then this side must inherently be kind of like inherently dark, and it's more so the light is in the dark on this side.
Yeah,
So, I
renting the dark
mean,
for an educational experience.
yeah, but I also don't think that the material, it's like if you shame the material world, that's shaming, in my view, that's shaming your heavenly mother or that's shaming creation. That's shaming it's God's wife. So it's
Sure, no,
like,
I understand what you're saying,
you're
and
renting a car, like,
I'm material. It sounds like I'm the opposite of a materialist when I talk about the material world that way, because we will shed it like an old pair of shoes, but it will be here for us if we want, always regenerating itself if we want to come back. And saying that the entity that created us lets us come and go as we please. It's free will, right? And we're immortal, so we can do it as many times as we want. What the church did is put a water wheel in that natural stream of consciousness, and it's holding us back for profit and resistance, and it's keeping us from understanding that our salvation is guaranteed.
I don't think salvation's guaranteed. I think it's possible to lose your individual soul immortality. I think that an eternal soul could sell itself by sinning repeatedly enough times with enough intention to where it essentially gets squelched into soul potential after it goes to the other side, or even before, and then the husk could be driven by a demonic energy.
In my research,
Um,
no more than 40 years can a soul torture itself here after death before it falls into the lazy river that brings it home. And that magnetic feeling of being pulled home, like being in a lazy river, is constant when you leave the body. And you can fight it, right? But if you don't, it'll carry you home. And so you're fighting it the whole time if you stay here in purgatory. And it takes a lot of will to fight that current. But some people are so possessed by, are caught up in a disease loop, a relationship with the material world, that they traps the soul here for a little while. But the soul, according to my research, gets innumerable second chances. The worst thing that it could possibly do to deviate from what I'm talking about is suicide, because that's a paradoxical thing regarding free will. And it's the ultimate violation of the original covenant you entered into. You don't remember it, that we all entered into when we decided to choose this body instead of another one or another one.
yeah, well, I think, I would definitely agree that it's not easy to sell your soul or sin enough to where that would happen, but it requires an intense amount of continued ritualistic pressure. Suicide is often an outcome. I also think that behaviors don't determine the karmic invocation, therefore, it's about the emotions behind the suicide. It just so happens that suicide, much like other behaviors, is almost always driven not by love. It's almost usually driven by fear or whatever the opposite of love might be. So it's like, usually, but not always.
And I don't
Does it
think
go
you go
back
to
that
hell when
far?
you kill yourself, but according to my research, you definitely go through a timeout experience where you get a lot of one-on-one. You know, you're not allowed back in public school anymore. You go to magnet school, or the school for people that did that, which is classroom of one, and you're not allowed to play with others until you get it worked out. So that would
Interesting.
be,
No, that makes sense.
yeah.
I think there's levels after we pass, and I think it depends on your level of awareness, because just like people here could say, you know what, I'm just going to exist outside the government and not really pay any much attention to engage in any agreements whatsoever, off-grid folks.
Mhm.
It's kind of like that, where after you pass, some folks are almost always going to follow the light, almost always going to review their lives. And there's levels to it probably too, like a gifted and talented track, because the architects of a lot of the, interdimensional stuff here are architects of some of the stuff on the other side too. And you mentioned electromagnetics, and I just wanted to kind of tie it back into, it's not, okay, so everything's dualistic. This is a realm of dualism, and you could say God and goddess. You could say electricity and magnetism. You could say information and matter. You could say movement and stillness. You could say, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Everything,
Right.
every possible
Right.
thing. And I think it's about oscillating sustainably, because ultimately what they don't want is what you alluded to, is like us becoming uncontrollable and ungovernable. But I think that happens. We can grow to be biblical giants. We can grow to live hundreds of years old and become quite large. I think that, speaking of parasites, I think the biblical giants probably had pretty gnarly gut flora and gut fauna
Yeah.
to support that symbiosis. But that's a tangent. Yeah. So where should we go next? What do you want to say? I'm open to whatever you feel like sharing.
I just think that we started this talking about the anthropomorphic creation of Jesus Christ, the literary invention of Jesus Christ, in my opinion, that covered up a very important story, a legacy that couldn't have been erased, wasn't properly erased because they couldn't. And it was known as the Second Temple cleansing. They don't talk about the first, which was the golden eagle. I don't think I talked about that in this round yet. The golden eagle that was Judas, the Galilean, pulled off of the pinnacle of the Jewish temple because Herod had put it up there in honor of the Romans who were starting a census so they could tax the Jews for the first time. And Matthias, the senior rebel to Judas, watched him and proudly watched him throw a rope there with his friends and pull the eagle down. And then they were all arrested, threatened to be killed. Some of them were. Judas was being saved for last. Herod died, and then everybody was released. I think it was Herod died, and everybody was released. And they were supposed to be all killed at his funeral. The people who were his administrators decided to trick him and let him die and not do that at his funeral. And Judas was released, and he started with his merry band of followers under what was called the fourth philosophy to start a rebellion, a very real rebellion, militaristic and spiritual. And he led the militaristic side, and his spiritual brother James, according to the Gospel of Thomas, was the spiritual teacher of the two. But the Sons of Thunder is what they were called, and they started the fourth philosophy. In 2 different books of Josephus, he talks about and outlines that they were anti-meat, anti-money, and anti-government. And Rome took that movement and turned it into Jesus and the 12 apostles. It watered it down and turned it into a frickin' dog and pony show, where Judas was the purse carrier for the group, and the one that was greedy and wanted to sell all his brothers out for a few silver coins, which is obviously the opposite of what Judas stood for, since he was the founder of the fourth philosophy, according to the primary source of first century history, Josephus Flavian. But for some reason, the scholars can't put that together because they're paid by a monetary system that is rooted in the foundation of the false narrative, where we pay our taxes and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Interesting. So what's the fourth philosophy? Talk to me a little bit about what that means.
Well, the original two first philosophies of Judaism were not rooted in the Pythagorean teacher of righteousness of the scrolls. They were rooted in the Roman-friendly version of like a Democrat-Republican scenario. And the third philosophy was the Essenes. And so they were kind of like low-level bench warmer versions of the group that was following the crucified person and his brother James. But the Essenes, there was probably 5,000 to 10,000 of them in Judas and James' camp. Of them, the cream of the crop became, so the Essenes were the third philosophy. Of them, a group went strict vegan, strict Pythagorean principles, and anti-meat, anti-money, anti-government. And then they acted on it militaristically. And so they were known as the Sicarii, which is an unjumbling of the word Iscariot. So Iscariot is an anagram, or whatever you call it, of Sicariot. And Judas was the leader of the Sicarii fourth philosophy movement, which is looked at in history as a violent, unreasonable movement. And it was painted that way so that they could pave the way for the false narrative they were going to flip the script on.
That's awesome. No, I know exactly what I was going to say. Okay, so that all makes total sense, and I mentioned earlier that I was going to tie things back to maybe previous versions or previous languages, and now's kind of a good time because I'm kind of trying to square this circle with the anti-meat thing and my beliefs in my head and stuff.
I know, most people aren't ready for that.
And one thing I could think is, no, bro, I've been vegan for periods of long time. I've been in every different health cult you can imagine, so it's not that I'm against. I've come to a conclusion that the real sin is the intention behind it. You could sin for gluttony, and you could sin for for murdering to eat. Not just like someone, like if a lion attacks you and, is trying to kill your children and you kill the lion, hypothetical, right? Not trying to go there.
No, that's fine.
No, violent because
I like that you're using the lion. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it could be a bear. I don't really care. But there's a carcass there. And, I don't think that eating it with love and reverence at that point, and even sorrow and grief and trying to make the most of the situation that you now have a carcass. If you go for a walk even, and you happen upon a freshly killed animal that fell off a cliff of its own accord, I don't think it's a sin to, take that and use it. But it's very uncommon, it's infrequent, and I think the normalization is something to the gut biome. And I think that especially murdering, when you murder something for gluttony, it's just like infuses such, because the people they hire to butcher, and like the conditions at the farms is certainly demonic to say the least. But I'm on board with it. Sure, it's historical. It could be true.
I'm not going to change your diet in this
what's,
talk. I get that.
Well, my diet, yeah, I mean, my diet's not my highest and best, but I eat once a day, and I spend the other 23 hours doing a variety of detox. I do cilantro oil, chlorella, spirulina, I mean, lots of different
That's good.
hydration methods, exercise, breath. It's now my mom got terminally sick when I was 4 and passed when I was 8, so I started binge eating when I was 4 years old. I'd be home alone and I'd be eating like food out of the fridge and chocolate milk out of the cartons and stuff to cope with being alone and the trauma. So it's so deep seated. I also feel that, speaking of creation, our relationship with food is a hologram of our relationship with that feminine aspect. And so, and there's also speaking of polarity, feasting is the feminine force and fasting is the masculine force, in that when we fast, we go internal to process life experience, we commune with Heavenly Father. When we feast, we process life experience together, we digest life experience together, and we commune with creation. We eat matter, it goes through us. And I think that people that don't process certain types of traumas have issues digesting certain foods, and people that have times in their life that they've never digested the experience of could have issues in certain parts of their tract. So I think there's a very holographic. I think eating is more of a spiritual, social, emotional need, just as much as it might be getting the minerals.
Yes. Yep. It's a bonding. And if you're vegan, you're doing it a lot, because just like any animal that's a plant eater, the nutrients aren't as dense. So the 3 meal a day allowance that our society gives us doesn't work for us. I mean, we've got to constantly be challenged to get the kind of calories that I need anyway to do what I want to do in the gym. Can't, the old ways of just going to McDonald's and getting a double cheeseburger, supersized fries, and a Coke and not needing to do anything again for 4 or 5 hours. That doesn't happen anymore. And I believe that a monetary system, one aspect of it, requires that we eat meat because it makes us more productive.
Tracy,
If you think of the monetary system as a Masonic baseball, there's only timeouts for food 3 times a day. And work is only required to respect one of them, right? And you're supposed to be there for 8, 9 hours, at least, in most cases 12. And there's no room for veganism in that scenario. And the menus at every available restaurant are also abusive to the vegan gut biome. And the level of meal planning and prep and where you have to go to get groceries. And you're also eating organic, fresh vegetables. You got to go. It's not like you can go really stock up like at Costco, because the stuff perishes in 3 or 4 days. So you're just constantly at it, right? But apparently that's the way that we used to live. And that was actually a fun thing, was eating all the time. And we didn't get fat when we did it. We got healthy. And now, eating is a mixed bag of tricks.
Makes total sense. I mean, I'm big on thinking about life before the Great Flood, and I can certainly imagine fruit being a main thing. Vegetables, herbs, teas, nuts, berries, seasonal,
All the time.
that's the bulk of it. And then the stuff you make with that, I just read this recipe for an amazing soup. It's called soup with the water. It's from Romania or something, and it's you toast cardamom, and then you boil it for half an hour, and then you add just a very simple sautéed onion, garlic, some aromatics, and then you have fresh ground parsley with lemon, like a weird oilless pesto that you dump a spoonful in, and it's this delicious, rich, brothy thing. Now, not to get off topic, yeah, and the monetary system, controlling the food supply, I tell people, produce your own food all the time. I think learning to eat less is huge for independence and sovereignty. If you are, let's be honest, when you are eating the food they're selling you, you're going to be overridden with parasites, and you're going to be sick either way. And you have to not be like that if you really want to not depend on the government.
Yeah.
You're going to,
at the level they're spraying us with stuff, you really have to be ahead of the game. You got to have a juicer. You got to have supplements. You've got to be able to offset the things that they're doing to limit your vitamin D uptake. All the things that are creating the perfect fertile ground for chronic disease, which is very profitable for them. And that's taken me a long time to learn. Like keeping us sick is a huge profit source for the hospitalers, are basically the people that print our money.
You talk about following the biblical Jesus is actually going to keep people sick. It's actually part of the big pharma thing.
Yeah, his hygienic advice and his dietary advice is absolutely in parallel with that of Beelzebub, which is Belial. He has two names, and he's the most named demon in all scripture. And you were talking about, let's get down to the original language and stuff, right? So I live with a woman that speaks fluent Hebrew, and so I can bounce things off of her and learn stuff. I haven't done that a lot, but with this particular scripture, I broke it down with her, and I understand exactly what they did there. And I think it is the loose strand in the sweater that peels back the whole of what's going on here in the New Testament. So in Psalms 22 verse, and I'm not the first one to find this. You can, if anybody does any research on Psalms 22, you'll see a lot of people in my research field have brought this up. But in the original Hebrew Tanakh that came hundreds of 1,500 years from before the Septuagint that was translated into Greek by the people that overthrew the first Jewish temple and pushed the teachers of righteousness into the desert. The translation differences between that Hebrew Tanakh and Septuagint in Psalms 22, verse 16 and 17, depending on which version you're reading, they remove the second of three mentionings of a lion that's attacking the psalmist. And they're mentioning these men that are surrounding this guy like a pack of dogs. And then, like a lion, they attack his hands and feet. Well, they cut out the part about the lion attacking, and they inserted that they surrounded him like a pack of dogs, and then they pierced his hands and his feet. And what we find there is that these church fathers, even 200, 300 years after the Septuagint, we don't know what the original Septuagint translation might have said, but it got changed at least once after Christianity was invented to include a crucifixion and prophecy there that was being given by, I think, David, the psalmist, about the piercing of his hands and feet through Christ, his lineage, that didn't have any business being in the text. And it's clear that it didn't belong there. And so that's the first strike against the people that invented this false narrative to create the illusion that we all should have sacrificed ourselves for what he did to save us from something, from this angry, fearful God who was insatiable with his need for blood sacrifice ritual until this one ultimate blood sacrifice ritual, which we should all drink from a cup, thinking it's blood, in honor of the body, in honor of, and to someone that eats meat, these things aren't offensive. But if for someone who's deeply in the Dead Sea Scrolls, to the point where it changed my diet 7 years ago, and now I know what it looks like on the other side of that consciousness, it's demonic as it could possibly be. And that is a form of ritual pollution that carries through into a real activity that people do at restaurants after they leave that Holy Communion. And they feel justified because this entity came along and wiped away an entire human history of dietary wisdom that had accumulated up until that point, where in Mark chapter 7, he tells them not to wash their hands and to eat anything, that nothing, no thing, not even talking about food, no thing from outside the body that goes into the body can defile it. Only your First Amendment rights can defile you, your speech. And that sounds like the seeds of a fascist regime, which it is.
Yeah, it sounds like the military that's running things today, let us chemtrail you, let us pump you full of shit that we can use to track you on an internet of things. Shut the fuck up about anything you know about that, though.
Yeah. I mean, the First Amendment that we're given in this country was created by Freemasons to just keep us sleeping a little longer because they knew we were headed for the information age and things might come out, right? But, they wanted to create a culture that believed it was free through a word called liberty, which doesn't really mean freedom. And liberty means we've been given permission to have some freedoms that can be revoked. And so a lot of people don't know that's what they're fighting for, is submission to a higher power that's not the one that created your soul. And that's a lower demiurge. And a lot, arguably, Satan.
That's not either of the gods that I was talking about, just to be clear.
Yeah.
The one that you mentioned, that guy,
well,
whether it's energetic or whether it's behind the people I mentioned, that's not the one I'm on board with.
I feel like it's a little bit of a yin and a yang, that they're not warring independence, that they're actually a whole expressing its flow. kind of like unoxygenated side of the blood supply in this vascular system and the oxygenated. They're not at war.
You mentioned that because it's the nature of the true Heavenly Father's light. It has to permeate anything and transmute anything into potential wisdom and love. And that is the form, as we're incarnated, is in the form of our decisions and our free will. It's funny, I just argued with some folks. There's so many cults that say free will is a myth, don't believe in free will. There's atheist cults, there's religious cults. It's, dude, how do you not see this? That a centralized power wants all of you to just believe, to just go with the fucking flow and not. The right decision's often the hardest one, you know? Saying no to these material.
Sorry, I mean,
No, that was good. I want to hear about the beehive.
it's a beehive, and
That was a good
Christology
time.
is the methodology of a beehive. And the King of Kings, all that, obey him. You know, if you don't obey Christ, you're not going to get to heaven. That creates a frequency weapon that harnesses free will of the hive. And if anybody tries to wake up the bee next to it, that altered frequency will alert the others and they will push him out. And that happens in families. And then you find in Luke chapter 49, I believe, where Jesus says, I came to burn it all down. In fact, I wish it was already burning. I came to separate. You think I came to bring peace and to bring families together? I came to separate father from son, mother from daughter, mother from stepdaughter. And he goes through every member of the family and says, I want them all fighting and they're burning it all. You think he'd follow that up with something beautiful about why? You know, what phoenix from the ashes should we expect, Jesus? But nope. You just want to burn it all down. And he doesn't talk about what he's trying to rebuild here until later, where you hear about the chosen 144,000 people that will be, their body will be rejuvenated into perfection. It's their material body. So kind of like a zombie apocalypse, but a lot prettier. And that's the highest goal that the Christian can attain, is being one of the exclusive club members in the 144,000. And that's a very limited, isolated number of people, considering the number of souls that are inhabiting the planet right now. And so all this while, this has been dangled in front of Christians for 2,000 years as trillions of people have come and gone, that only 144,000 will join him for 1,000 years in splendor on earth with their refurbished old shoes, their bodies. And so this seeking of a zombie rejuvenation of the old body is completely devoid of the soul in one's consciousness. And that's exactly what it was hypnotically designed to do, was to remove the concept of the soul so that you wouldn't know what your power is, so that they could make it seem like they had exclusive control over what happens next. And then they used money as a way, they used it to, to buy your salvation. And then that changed a little bit, but it's still kind of the same thing. And what nobody knows is this is the bank in its early form. Once it understood on a spiritual level how to act as a central broker for salvation, it came over here and bankrupted us until we learned our lesson, and then showed us a bank that was perfect, that we should always go through. And so they learned this decentralization of power, hip tossing the soul out from its rightful position and replacing it with the King of Kings, who that archon is. We started this, like, where do demons come from? Well, once you understand the difference between the creator souls and the demiurge.
I love what you pointed out about Jesus of the Bible being a demon that's talking about breaking up the family, because almost everyone can agree that there's a central agenda to break up the nuclear family from multiple dimensions.
Mhm.
Also, the whole thing is perfect. What you framed it as, this like exclusive club initiation, where it's a complete perversion. It's a complete perversion. And, even of killing the brother and, being told to kill your child and thinking that it's better to obey that, I mean, come on, people. Like, what the fuck? It's not heavenly at all.
I don't see a church when I drive by one. I see the nicest building in town, no matter what the economy's doing. And I wonder how we didn't know the whole time that was the enterprise. God is enslaving us in a private prison in a slow game of inches. And these people are so smart, they invented the NFL through the Yale Skull and Bones as the modern form of circus to distract us as they were doing this over time. And so that's, People don't know.
Totally fixed.
Yeah, and
Fixed by the refs.
the
And
Bonesmen
they just
invented
dangle things
communism.
like prestige.
The Bonesmen
Yeah.
invented communism
Oh,
with
that's
cheap
funny.
opium in China, and they funded through Paul Warburg the investments for the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So both beta tests were funded by Bonesmen, Masons, and the Church of Christ to create a Hegelian dialectical between all these countries that made them all think that the other wanted to wipe them off the map. And they had their philosophy was right and the other one was wrong. And if their kids were not armored against the other one, then they would grow up with the wrong philosophy and what they're doing is they're fracking our consciousnesses against each other for an energy yield that we don't understand. And that is best described by some philosophers as loosh, LOSH.
Yeah, for sure, and beyond just that, there's so many advantages to brainwashing people into being adversarial and competitive, endless. I think about harvesting energy too. What's interesting, is there a connection between the 48 laws of power and then the skulls and bones? Because I wanted to pivot into the 48 laws of power and the 48 nights, because that was fascinating when you touched on that the first time. I want to cover that in this
Oh,
episode.
thanks. Yeah. So the creation of the state in the Middle East that you said was, you were bringing up Palestine. And I was saying that a lot of people don't understand that war is never supposed to end. It's supposed to keep our attention away from the church. That's why it was invented. And it was also invented for another reason that we talked about earlier, because the Dead Sea Scrolls were popping up out of the caves at Qumran in the late 1800s. And so the church waited until after it had established Israel officially as a state in 1947 before it announced the discovery of the scrolls officially. But they'd been pooping out of the caves for half a century, and they were the motivation behind the Balfour Agreement. And a lot of people know that. And I'm going to put this on your show, and I don't think this has ever been recorded by anybody saying it. The famous book, The Celestine Prophecy, that came out in the 90s by a guy named Redmond, I believe, Redfield, something like that, was about this discovery in the late 1800s and how the church and the state and Palestine reacted to the people that were seeking the insights of the scrolls. And he could not tell us that in the late 90s. He was afraid that he would suffer the fate of Salman Rushdie if he did. So he changed the identity of and the geography of all the places and people to make it seem like a fiction about a teaching that leads to from where we were to this point B, which he says are the 9 insights of these special scrolls. And it took me 30 years to figure out that he was scared for his life, and he was telling us about the original discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I had to become an expert on the scrolls to understand that the Celestine Prophecy is actually about that discovery and what those people were up against. The insights are the scroll insights.
And it's a work of fiction. It's presented as a work of fiction, you're saying? That's good.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
That's
It's
awesome,
gold.
dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll put links to all this, like pretty much anything you mentioned. I'll have my AI find links for and put them in the show notes.
Cool.
One thing to talk about is, you touched on the fact that Hebrew could still be a little bit corrupted, essentially, more or less. And I would argue that any language is inherently material and therefore has a taint of corruption upon it, because you're slowing down the pure energy of, whatever thoughts, ideas. Yeah. So point is, Aramaic, is it true? I hear this a lot. Is it true that it's most likely that the fictional character Jesus, or the characters he was inspired by of those times, would have spoken Aramaic? That would be their language?
Yes, they were definitely Arabic.
Okay.
They were Arabic, and they were speaking Aramaic.
And I have a really hard time finding good information about Aramaic. I've only ever found, I think, 2 teachers online that teach it, and it's not on Rosetta Stone or anything. And I've even spoken to some really well-connected rabbis that are like, there's some really deep codes in Aramaic. There's a reason it's not disseminated. What do you know about that? What could you speak to about that?
Pesher, Pesher is code that they wrote in. And so we know from the successful lawsuit by Dr. Robert Eisenman from Long Beach, California, the anthropologist from Long Beach, and successfully sued the Universal Church, Catholic Church, for the release of all the scrolls. And it is many years this thing lasted until 2003 when he got them. But when they popped out, he found out that what some other people had tried to say but didn't have the evidence of, that the Hebrew releases from the church all these years, for the last 50 years, 53 years before this lawsuit was won, were mostly frauds, had mostly been doctored to not deviate from the narrative that the monetary system and the tax basis is using right now for control. And he had access after 2003. So I forgive all the Christians that haven't done this research, because really, man, I mean, this information's only been out for 20 years. And to expect everybody to get off their keister and just start knowing that and researching it is not something I expect from everybody. So
Yeah, yeah.
I definitely am very forgiving when people don't know this. Aramaic is there, and the Aramaic is clear. And that's where my information comes from about Belial and the 3 nets of deception, the fisher of men, turning other people into fishers of men, and the dietary pollution leading to spiritual pollution, and ultimately submission to tyranny, which they call fornication. And there's a few other rules in there that have to do with blood pollution, like not sleeping with women on their periods and stuff. I think is not important to bring up in any debate, but or discussion. But the main thing is that they were absolutely anti-money and anti-wealth. And if you entered into their camp, they would take all your money and they would put it in a pile. And if you left, they would give you at least what you walked in with. But you could never come back, and they would treat you like you were dead if you left. And it turns out that Pythagorean started that. And they were just basically carrying on the teachings of righteousness of Pythagorean, who's Greek, which explains a lot, because there's some weird shit going on in the Old Testament. Daniel's diet is very clear. The whole book is about correct diet that pleases God and makes you at your best physical possible condition. And then we get the kosher laws. Where does that fit with Daniel? But it turns out that Daniel was the most found book in the Dead Sea Scroll caves of Qumran. So that book, Enoch, Genesis, Isaiah, Jeremiah, those books were all in there. And when you research those books, they're all very clear about the proper diet. And I'm not trying to harp on that. I'm trying to harp on it as like it is the most important core tenet, because if you don't have that fixed, you can't do any of the other things right, according to what these guys taught, what Pythagoras taught. And he basically said, men of his caliber of intellect, don't eat carcasses. And the first time I heard that, I was still eating fish. I hadn't fully made the crossover, and I stopped when I heard that, just because. And just recently, I heard that the 153 fish story and the Jesus story is actually Pythagoras' story. And he used the lucky guess of 153 fish in the fisherman's net to baffle them, so that they would let the fish go while they were still breathing, while they were still alive. And then he talked to them about a diet that was no harm and that led to the highest possible consciousness. And they followed it and became Pythagoreans. That's 600 years older than the story, the way it was used for the opposite despotism by the monetary system to make people eat more fish, and to think that was wealth and abundance, and that Jesus led to that exact type of wealth and abundance and fish pollution of the body.
Right. I wonder if the word carcasses could be meaning the body of something that was murdered. That's just a random thought. But
carry on is roadkill. It could be anything that was just dead that was laying there when you walked up on it. They preferred things that you slit the throat of so that it was fresh, right? But the only way that you could get away with that is if you were doing it for God. And so the temples became places where you could legally slaughter an animal and eat without regret. But
they started using this meat addiction, and they started justifying the murder and killing of animals in the name of God. And that's just, gotcha. Yeah.
And there's a God that actually likes that. And he's in the Old Testament talking about being pleased by the smell of burning flesh and blood. And that pleases that God all the way until his only begotten child sacrifice, which apparently he was into before that with Isaac. You know, this creature that likes to kill his own children is well known in mythology. And it's Kronos, the inventor of time in this realm. And he's associated with the planet Saturn, which is apparently exactly the black cube worship, where the black cube worship leads, that for people that do research into this death cult runs all religions, and the common denominator in all religions being the black cube. And I agree with that. And the guy who was the author of the book, The Cult of the Black Cube, was the first author that ever showed me, the layman, how to evoke a demon. And it scared the piss out of me. And I didn't actually do the ritual. Just reading it, I felt like I might be, getting close. And I didn't ever want to get closer than that. And he didn't ever want to get closer to what the results were. But he wrote this book, and I think the book is very telling of something that these people have a deep respect for that we don't. And it loves blood. It's like the ultimate form of currency for this thing. As part of these rituals, like, you can maybe feel the presence of it starting to show up, or something starting to change, no matter what they do, what they draw on the floor, what they burn in the bowl. But the moment that they cut the hand and the blood hits the mess that they've made in the bowl, this thing shows up like flies on shit. And I think that's Beelzebub.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me, just as a truth seeker, knowing I've seen disclosures of celebrities drinking blood in public, trying to flex, and then having to go back and cover it up. I know that there's been high-ranking business people have been heavily pressured into signing things with blood, and they'll frame it any which way. They'll say it's a joke. They'll say it's for fun. They'll say we do it. They'll say you have to find some kind of secret, whatever. And so that I can cross-reference that for sure. That this dark path is marked by a pressure to draw blood. And when you say it appears, you mean physically, like some shit starts manifesting? Because I damn near have not been near any.
Apparently, if the people that are more adept can see maybe shape formations, but this guy didn't. He said it just showed up, and the electricity in the room changed in the air, and the smell of electricity in the room changed. He said all the candles in the room darkened. They didn't blow out; they just darkened, like it was harder for them to light the room. And he got cold instantly. I mean, he was standing next to an ice cube, and it just, he immediately did everything he could to eject himself from the ceremony instantly, because he didn't want any business. But
good for him.
It came to
good
him.
for him.
It came to him either that night or 3 nights later in a dream he couldn't shake himself out of, and he was on the North Pole of Saturn, sitting Indian style, looking out against a red desert with a purple sky, and looked up and he saw the formation in the sky that we've seen with so many satellites that we've sent by there. That is a giant cube formation in the atmosphere right above the North Pole. And he looked at it, and it was a pulsating black cube, twisted at an angle. And it was reflective like a liquid metal. And he said it spoke to him. And it healed. It said it was going to heal him, but it wanted him to tell his story. And he wrote this book to tell the story. And as he's writing the book, all of his ailments that put him in a wheelchair went away within weeks. And it was like a Jesus cure. The guy went to full health. And then he mysteriously died after releasing the book. I haven't really got into that. But yeah, served his purpose, and the covenant was over. So that's why you don't enter covenants with things like that. Right, no matter what the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good lesson, and that's kind of how I saw the story going. Radical doubt, radical skepticism, radical sovereignty is the way to go. Straight to source, straight to Heavenly Father. No attachments, no covenants, and we'll definitely do another episode about a subtopic here. My mind is reeling with all sorts of things. I have to cut it short. This is the only episode that's ever gone this long by more than half an hour over the previous longest episode, so I've got my work cut out for me.
Thanks for tuning in to The Blunt Truth with Stephen and Dougie. And enjoy the conversation. Join us every Wednesday for more unfiltered discussions. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support keeps the truth coming. Elevate your journey. Connect with us on social media at blunttruthpodcast.com. Until next time, be kind, keep growing, and remember, knowledge is infinite.